In the vast expanse of the Andromeda Galaxy, where 1,000 species bow to the might of crystalline beings and energy-based entities, where perfection is measured by the purity of one's genetic code and the brightness of one's telepathic aura, there exists a truth that even the most advanced civilizations refuse to acknowledge. Sometimes the greatest strength comes from the most unexpected places. Princess Zara-Thyss of the Ethereal Dominion possessed a mind that could calculate hyperspace trajectories in seconds and a heart that yearned for connection across the stars. But her body, twisted by a rare genetic condition, marked her as untouchable among her people. For 300 years, she had watched potential suitors flee at the sight of her asymmetrical form and dimmed bioluminescent patterns. The Galactic Council deemed her bloodline tainted. Her own father, the Emperor, spoke of her only in whispers. The greatest healers in known space declared her condition incurable, a cosmic joke played by an indifferent universe. But they had never met a human. Humans, those strange bipedal creatures from a backwater world called Earth, had a peculiar reputation throughout the galaxy. They were known for their stubbornness, their refusal to accept the impossible, and their annoying habit of proving superior civilizations wrong. They were the species that looked at a black hole and wondered if they could use it as a power source. They were the ones who met gods and asked them for their credentials. When Ambassador Marcus Chun of the Terran Federation first laid eyes on Princess Zara-Thyss, he didn't see a damaged royal or a genetic failure. He saw brilliant silver eyes that held the wisdom of centuries, delicate features that spoke of inner strength, and a spirit that blazed brighter than any star. And for the first time in galactic history, someone looked at the untouchable princess and whispered the words that would reshape the fate of civilizations. Be mine. This is the story of how humanity's greatest strength, their ability to see worth where others see worthlessness, to find beauty in imperfection, and to fight impossible odds with nothing but determination and heart, would challenge the very foundations of galactic society. This is the story of love that defied cosmic law, of two beings who refuse to accept that some barriers cannot be broken, and of how sometimes the most powerful force in the universe isn't technology or telepathy or pure energy. Sometimes it's simply the courage to care. Princess Zara-Thyss stood at the observation deck of the Crystal Palace, her six-fingered hands pressed against the transparent aluminum that separated her from the void. Stars wheeled slowly past as the massive space station orbited the twin suns of Etherealis Prime, each point of light a reminder of worlds she would never visit, people she would never meet, and a future that grew dimmer with each passing cycle. The Ethereal Dominion's capital station was a marvel of engineering that stretched across 300 kilometers of space. Crystalline spires reached toward infinity, their surfaces pulsing with the collected thoughts and emotions of 1 billion telepathic beings. Energy conduits carried not electricity, but pure consciousness itself, powering technologies that could reshape matter with a thought and bend spacetime like clay. At the center of it all stood the Crystal Palace, home to the royal family whose bloodline had guided the Dominion for over 10,000 years. Every member of the royal house possessed the same ethereal beauty that marked their species as superior among the galaxy's countless races. Their skin glowed with soft, bioluminescent patterns that shifted color with their emotions. Their minds could touch thoughts across star systems. Their bodies were perfect symphonies of genetic engineering, each organ optimized for maximum efficiency and longevity. Every member except one, Zara-Thyss, caught her reflection in the transparent aluminum and felt the familiar stab of disappointment. Where her siblings displayed symmetrical patterns of light beneath their translucent skin, hers flickered irregularly like a broken communication array. Where their thoughts projected clearly across vast distances, hers barely reached beyond the palace walls. Her left arm ended at the elbow, a birth defect that no amount of advanced medical science had been able to correct. Her spine curved at an awkward angle, forcing her to walk with a pronounced limp that marked her as flawed to anyone with eyes to see. The worst part wasn't the physical deformities. Ethereals had long ago moved beyond such primitive concerns as physical appearance. No, the worst part was the silence in her mind, where the collective consciousness of her people should have been. The telepathic network that connected every ethereal across the galaxy treated her like a dead zone, a null space where thoughts went to die. She could hear fragments of conversation, catch whispers of emotion, but the full communion that was every ethereal's birthright remained forever beyond her reach. Footsteps echoed behind her, the distinctive harmonic resonance that announced the approach of her younger brother, Prince Veltarion. She didn't turn around. In 300 years of life, she had learned to recognize the emotional signatures of everyone in the palace, even with her limited telepathic abilities. Sister. His voice carried the musical quality that marked highborn ethereals, each syllable perfectly modulated to convey respect while maintaining appropriate distance. Father requests your presence in the throne room. Zarathustra finally turned, noting how her brother positioned himself exactly 4.7 meters away from her. Close enough to show familial respect, far enough to avoid any accidental physical contact that might contaminate his own telepathic abilities. The fear was groundless, of course. Whatever genetic anomaly had damaged her couldn't be transmitted through touch. But superstition died hard, even among the most enlightened species in the galaxy. Let me guess, she said, allowing a trace of bitterness to color her words. Another potential suitor has withdrawn his offer of marriage after reviewing my genetic profile. Veltarion's bioluminescent patterns shifted to a pale blue, the color of diplomatic embarrassment. The Crown Prince of the Hegemony sent his regrets this morning. Apparently, his advisors conducted a more thorough analysis of the potential offspring and deemed the risk unacceptable. The risk? Zarathustra almost laughed, as if she were some kind of plague carrier instead of simply a being whose genetics had taken an unexpected path. How many does that make this cycle? 15? 20? 17? Veltarion corrected with the precision their species valued above all else. Though I should mention that the Vorthan Empire's representative seemed genuinely interested until his telepathic scan revealed the extent of your neural isolation. Neural isolation. Such a clinical term for the loneliness that ate at her soul like acid. Zarathustra had tried to explain it to others over the years, this sensation of being surrounded by a billion minds yet hearing only whispers and echoes. It was like standing in a vast concert hall while everyone else experienced a symphony, but all she could catch were scattered notes that made no sense in isolation. I suppose I should be grateful, she said, running her hand along the smooth wall of the observation deck. At least he bothered to conduct a scan before fleeing in terror. Zarathustra. Her brother's tone carried a warning. You know, Father only wants what's best for the Dominion. A marriage alliance could strengthen our position against the collective. The collective. Even the name sent shivers through the telepathic network. They were the antithesis of everything the ethereal Dominion represented, beings of pure logic who viewed emotion as a weakness to be excised and individual consciousness as an inefficiency to be corrected. For the past century, they had been expanding their influence through the Outer Rim territories, converting entire species to their cause with promises of technological advancement and freedom from the messy complications of feeling. The irony wasn't lost on Zarathustra. Her people fought against the elimination of individual consciousness, yet they had effectively eliminated her from their collective awareness. She was a ghost haunting the halls of her own palace, acknowledged but never truly seen, spoken to but never truly heard. I understand Father's position, she said finally, but I'm beginning to wonder if the collective might have a point about the inefficiency of emotion. At least they're honest about their rejection. Veltarion's patterns flashed red with alarm. Sister, you cannot speak such words. If the court telepaths overhear what? They'll exile me? Remove me from the succession? Declare me unfit for royal duties? Zarathustra gestured toward the stars beyond the window. Look around, brother. I'm already a ghost in my own home. What more could they possibly take from me? The silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant hum of the station's consciousness conduits. Finally, Veltarion spoke again, his voice softer than before. There is one more possibility. Father has been in communication with the Terran Federation. Zarathustra blinked in surprise. The Terran Federation was barely a footnote in galactic politics, a collection of worlds populated by bipedal mammals who had only achieved faster-than-light travel in the past few centuries. They were considered primitive by most galactic standards, lacking both significant telepathic abilities and the advanced technologies that marked truly civilized species. Humans. She couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. Father wants to marry me to a human? I thought the council declared them barely sentient. The council may have been premature in that assessment, Veltarian admitted. Recent reports suggest that humans possess certain unexpected capabilities. Their ambassador has requested an audience to discuss potential diplomatic relations. And Father sees this as an opportunity to rid himself of his embarrassing daughter while gaining a foothold with a developing species. The pieces fell into place with depressing clarity. Two problems solved with one convenient marriage. It's not like that, isn't it? Zara THYSS turned back to the window, watching a transport vessel dock with one of the lower platforms. Even from this distance, she could see the elegant curves of ethereal design, all flowing lines and crystalline beauty. Everything in her world was perfect, symmetrical, optimized for maximum efficiency and aesthetic appeal. Everything except her. When is this audience scheduled? She asked. 3 cycles from now. The human ambassador is traveling aboard one of their vessels. Apparently, they refuse to use our transportation networks for diplomatic missions. Another mark of primitiveness, Zara THYSS assumed. Most civilized species had abandoned physical spacecraft in favor of consciousness transfer and teleportation technologies. The fact that humans still traveled in metal shells through the vacuum of space only reinforced their reputation as technological children playing with dangerous toys. I suppose I should prepare myself for another disappointment, she said. At least humans probably don't have telepathic abilities for me to disappoint. Actually, Veltarian's patterns shifted to an uncertain yellow. That's one of the things that makes them interesting. Intelligence reports suggest they have developed alternative forms of communication that don't rely on telepathy. Some of their diplomatic successes have been quite remarkable. Alternative forms of communication. Zara THYSS almost smiled at the contradiction. Every advanced species in the galaxy had long ago abandoned primitive verbal and visual communication in favor of direct mind-to-mind contact. The idea of beings who had never developed telepathy yet somehow achieved interstellar civilization was almost absurd, almost fascinating. Perhaps, she said slowly, I should research these humans before our meeting. If I'm to be married off to one of them, I should at least understand what I'm getting myself into. Veltarian's relief was visible in the brightening of his luminescent patterns. I'll have the Xenoarchaeology department compile a complete cultural briefing. Though I should warn you, human behavior can be quite unpredictable by our standards. Unpredictable. The word carried a strange appeal. Zarathustra says it spent 3 centuries surrounded by beings whose thoughts she could partially read, whose actions followed predictable patterns based on logic and social hierarchy. The idea of meeting someone whose next move she couldn't anticipate sent an unexpected thrill through her damaged nervous system. Thank you, brother. I'll review the materials and prepare for the audience. Veltarian hesitated, his patterns flickering with an emotion she couldn't quite identify. Zara THYSS? For what it's worth, I hope this human proves different from the others. You deserve better than exile in a political marriage. The unexpected kindness brought tears to her eyes. Another mark of her genetic abnormality, since properly developed ethereals had evolved beyond such crude emotional displays. I've learned not to hope too much, Veltarian. It only makes the disappointment worse. After her brother left, Zara THYSS remained at the observation deck, watching the stars wheel past in their eternal dance. Somewhere out there, a human ship was making its way toward Etherealis Prime, carrying an ambassador who might be her last chance at finding some kind of connection with another being. She tried not to think about what alternative forms of communication might entail. She tried not to wonder if humans found physical deformities as repulsive as the rest of the galaxy seemed to. She tried not to hope that maybe, just maybe, this time will be different. But deep in the damaged neural pathways that isolated her from her people's collective consciousness, something stirred that she hadn't felt in decades. It wasn't quite hope. She had learned better than that. But it was something close to curiosity, a desire to understand these strange beings who traveled the stars in metal shells and communicated without touching minds. 3 cycles. In 3 cycles, she would meet her first human and discover if the universe had any surprises left for a broken princess who had spent 3 centuries learning that she would never be enough. The stars offered no answers, but for the first time in longer than she could remember, Zara THYSS found herself looking forward to tomorrow instead of dreading it. Perhaps that was enough for now. Marcus Chun stood on the bridge of the TFS Determination, watching the Crystal Palace grow larger through the main viewport as their ship approached the docking port. The ethereal space station was unlike anything in human space. A delicate construction of crystalline towers and energy conduits that seemed to defy conventional engineering. It looked more like a work of art than a functional habitat, all flowing curves and impossible spires that caught and refracted the light of twin stars into prismatic rainbows. "It's beautiful," said Lieutenant Sarah Martinez, the ship's communications officer. "I've seen the holographic records, but they don't do it justice." "Beautiful and deadly," added Commander Jackson Cole from the tactical station. "Sensors are picking up energy signatures that could vaporize our entire fleet if they wanted to flex their muscles." Marcus nodded, keeping his expression neutral despite the nervous energy coursing through his system. At 45 years old, he had served as a Terran Federation ambassador for nearly 2 decades, negotiating everything from trade agreements with the pragmatic Orthans to territorial disputes with the militant hegemony. But this was his first direct contact with the ethereal dominion, arguably the most powerful civilization in the local galactic cluster. The fact that they had requested this meeting at all was surprising. For the past 3 centuries since humanity had achieved faster-than-light travel, the ethereals had largely ignored them. Most galactic powers viewed humans as an amusing curiosity at best, a species that had somehow stumbled into interstellar civilization despite lacking the telepathic abilities or advanced technologies that marked truly developed races. Marcus had read the cultural briefings during the 2-week journey from Earth. The ethereals were beings of pure thought and emotion, connected through a telepathic network that spanned their entire empire. They valued perfection above all else: genetic perfection, technological perfection, the perfect harmony of 1 billion minds working in flawless synchronization. They were beautiful, immortal, and utterly convinced of their own superiority, which made their sudden interest in humanity all the more puzzling. "Incoming transmission," Martinez announced. "Audio and visual, but they're also attempting some kind of telepathic contact." "Block the telepathic channel," Marcus ordered. "Standard human diplomatic protocol with telepathic species. Too much risk of mental manipulation or accidental psychological contamination. Accept audio and visual only." The main screen flickered, revealing the face of what Marcus assumed was an ethereal official. The being's features were elegant beyond human understanding, with skin that seemed to glow from within and eyes like polished silver. When it spoke, its voice carried harmonics that made the bridge speakers resonate with musical tones. "Terran Vessel Determination, you are cleared for docking at Platform 7. Ambassador Chun, His Imperial Majesty awaits your arrival in the throne room within 1 standard hour of docking completion." The transmission ended without waiting for a response, which Marcus supposed was typical for beings who considered themselves the pinnacle of galactic civilization. He turned to his aide, Lieutenant Commander Janet Thompson, who had been reviewing the diplomatic protocols one final time. "What's the proper approach for greeting an ethereal emperor?" he asked. "According to the files, most species perform some form of mental prostration, a telepathic acknowledgement of the emperor's superiority, and a request for permission to exist in his presence." Thompson's expression was carefully neutral. "Obviously, that's not an option for us." Obviously, Marcus had to suppress a smile. Human inability to perform telepathic rituals had been a source of diplomatic incidents before, but the ethereals had specifically requested this meeting knowing full well what humans were and weren't capable of. Backup protocol? Physical bow no deeper than 30 degrees. Verbal acknowledgement of his title and our gratitude for the audience. And under no circumstances are we to make physical contact with any ethereal. Apparently their society considers it taboo, except between bonded mates. The docking process took nearly an hour, during which Marcus reviewed his mission parameters one final time. Officially, the Terran Federation was interested in establishing formal diplomatic relations with the Dominion. Unofficially, They were desperate to find allies against the expanding influence of the collective, the machine logic empire that had been converting entire species to their emotionless philosophy. Humans had a particular interest in stopping the collective's expansion, since early encounters suggested that human consciousness was particularly resistant to their conversion technologies. The collective viewed this as either a fascinating puzzle to be solved or a dangerous anomaly to be eliminated, neither option particularly appealing from humanity's perspective. The airlock cycle completed, and Marcus found himself stepping into a corridor that seemed to be carved from a single massive crystal. Bioluminescent patterns pulsed along the walls in complex rhythms that he suspected carried meaning he couldn't interpret. The air itself felt different here, charged with some kind of energy that made his skin tingle. Two ethereal escorts waited for him, their forms so perfectly symmetrical they might have been sculpted rather than born. They stood at precise distances from each other, and, from him, their eyes fixed on some point above his head, as if looking directly at him might cause contamination. Ambassador Shunned, the one on the left, spoke, its voice carrying the same musical quality as the communications officer. "I'm Diplomat Kethallen. You will accompany us to the throne room. You will speak only when addressed directly by His Imperial Majesty. You will maintain physical distance of no less than 2 meters from all ethereal personnel." "Understood," Marcus replied, falling into step behind them as they glided down the corridor. The ethereals moved with an effortless grace that made human walking seem clumsy by comparison, their feet barely seeming to touch the crystalline floor. The throne room was vast beyond imagination, its ceiling lost in shadows that seemed to stretch toward infinity. Thousands of ethereals lined the walls in perfect formation, their collective presence creating a low harmonic hum that Marcus could feel in his bones. At the center of it all sat the Emperor himself on a throne that appeared to be grown rather than built, its organic curves suggesting some kind of living crystal. Emperor Thrallneth was ancient even by ethereal standards, his bioluminescent patterns so bright they cast actual shadows. When his silver eyes fixed on Marcus, the human ambassador felt the weight of 10,000 years of accumulated wisdom and power. Ambassador Chun of the Terran Federation, the Emperor's voice carried clearly across the vast space without any apparent amplification. "You stand before the crystal throne as the representative of your species. What does humanity offer the ethereal dominion?" Marcus had rehearsed this moment during the long journey, but standing here, surrounded by beings who considered his entire species barely above animals, the prepared words seemed inadequate. Instead, he found himself speaking from the heart. "Your Imperial Majesty, humanity offers what we have always offered: determination in the face of impossible odds, innovation born from necessity, and the stubborn refusal to accept that some problems cannot be solved." He paused, meeting the Emperor's gaze directly. "We understand that by your standards, we are primitive. We cannot touch minds across the void or reshape matter with pure thought. But we have something that even the most advanced civilizations seem to have lost: the ability to see potential where others see only problems." A ripple of movement went through the assembled ethereals, though whether it indicated approval or offense, Marcus couldn't tell. The Emperor's expression remained unreadable. "Interesting," Thrallneth said finally. "Tell me, Ambassador, what do you know of the collective?" "We know they represent an existential threat to everything we consider valuable about consciousness and individuality," Marcus replied without hesitation. "We know they've been expanding their influence through conversion rather than conquest, which makes them particularly dangerous to species who value free will. And you believe humanity can stand against them?" "I believe humanity won't go quietly into whatever gray existence they're offering. Our entire history is built on refusing to accept the inevitable." The Emperor was quiet for a long moment, his luminescent patterns shifting through colors Marcus couldn't identify. When he spoke again, his tone carried a different quality. "There's a matter of some delicacy I wish to discuss, Ambassador. It concerns my daughter, Princess Zara-Thys." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. The cultural briefings had mentioned the princess only in passing. The Emperor's eldest child, heir to the throne, but with little additional information. The fact that the Emperor was bringing her up in their first diplomatic meeting suggested significant implications. "I would be honored to hear about her Royal Highness," Marcus said carefully. My daughter possesses certain unique characteristics that have made traditional marriage alliances challenging. She is brilliant, accomplished, and possesses deep knowledge of galactic politics and xenobiology. However, she also carries genetic variations that make her incompatible with standard ethereal telepathic networks. Marcus processed this information quickly. An ethereal society where telepathic communion was the foundation of all social interaction, being cut off from the network would be like being struck deaf and blind simultaneously. The political implications alone would be staggering. Your Imperial Majesty, if I may ask, what does this have to do with the Terran Federation? Humans, the Emperor said slowly, communicate through methods that do not require telepathic contact. This suggests that your daughter might find meaningful connection with a human mate in ways that have proven impossible with telepathic species. The full weight of what was being proposed hit Marcus like a physical blow. The Emperor wasn't just discussing diplomatic relations. He was proposing a marriage alliance between his daughter and a human representative. The political ramifications would be enormous, potentially elevating humanity from a minor backwater species to a recognized galactic power overnight. Your Imperial Majesty, Marcus said carefully, such an alliance would require extensive consideration by both our governments. The cultural differences alone would be substantial, the Emperor agreed, but perhaps not insurmountable. I propose a meeting between yourself and Princess Zura Thyss to determine if mutual understanding is possible. If so, we can proceed with formal negotiations. If not, we will consider this conversation merely an interesting philosophical discussion. Marcus felt the weight of history pressing down on him. His response in the next few seconds could determine the future relationship between humanity and one of the galaxy's most powerful civilizations. More personally, it could determine the fate of a princess who had apparently spent her life isolated from her own people. I would be honored to meet Princess Zura Thyss, Your Imperial Majesty, though I should note that any formal alliance would require approval from the Terran Federation government. Naturally. But first, let us see if communication is even possible between our species on a personal level. The Emperor's patterns shifted to what Marcus hoped was approval. The princess will meet with you tomorrow in the palace gardens. I trust you will treat her with the respect due her station and her unique circumstances. Of course, Your Imperial Majesty. As Marcus was escorted back through the crystalline corridors toward the docking platform, his mind raced with implications and possibilities. He had come here expecting routine diplomatic negotiations. Instead, he found himself potentially arranging a marriage between species that had never attempted such a union. Back aboard the Determination, he called his senior staff together for an emergency briefing. Sir, Lieutenant Commander Thompson said after he had outlined the situation, we're not talking about a simple trade agreement here. This could fundamentally alter the balance of power in this sector of the galaxy. Or it could be a disaster that destroys any chance of positive human-ethereal relations, Commander Cole added. We don't know anything about this princess, except that her own people consider her damaged goods. That's exactly why it might work, Marcus said slowly, the pieces falling into place in his mind. Think about it. Humans have always been the underdogs, the species that doesn't fit into normal galactic hierarchies. If she's been isolated from her own people's telepathic networks, she might actually understand what it's like to be human better than any other ethereal in history. And if she doesn't, Martinez asked, if this is just a way for the Emperor to dispose of an embarrassing daughter while gaining a foothold with a primitive species, then we find it out tomorrow and politely decline any further negotiations, Marcus replied. But if there's even a chance that this could work, that we could find genuine understanding between our species, we have to try. He looked around at his staff, seeing his own mixture of excitement and apprehension reflected in their faces. Humanity had always succeeded by taking chances that more cautious species wouldn't dare attempt. This was just another impossible situation that required a typically human solution. Give me everything we have on Princess Zura Thyss, he ordered. Medical records, psychological profiles, anything that might help me understand what I'm walking into tomorrow. And contact Earth. The Federation Council needs to know that we might be about to make galactic history. As his staff dispersed to their tasks, Marcus stood alone on the bridge, looking out at the crystal palace that hung like a jewel against the star field. Somewhere in those crystalline towers was a princess who had spent 3 centuries learning that she would never be enough for her own people. Tomorrow, he would find out if she might be perfect for his. The palace gardens stretched across an entire level of the Crystal Palace, a carefully cultivated ecosystem that showcased flora from 1,000 worlds. Bioluminescent trees cast gentle shadows, while crystalline flowers chimed in harmonious frequencies that created a natural symphony. The air here was sweeter than in the rest of the station, filtered through organic processors that removed the metallic tang of recycled atmosphere. Princess Zara HFY arrived early, as was her habit. She preferred to familiarize herself with a space before others arrived, to find the positions where her physical limitations would be least obvious, and her escape routes most accessible. The garden's winding paths provided excellent cover, and the background harmony would mask any awkward pauses in conversation. She had spent the previous 2 cycles studying everything available about humanity and their ambassador. The information was surprisingly limited for a species that had been in contact with galactic civilization for 3 centuries. Humans seemed to resist detailed cataloging, their cultures and individuals displaying variations that defied the neat classifications that work for most species. What she had learned fascinated and puzzled her in equal measure. Humans were physically weak compared to most galactic species, with lifespans barely a century long and sensory capabilities that rank below average in nearly every category. They lacked telepathic abilities entirely, relying instead on primitive verbal and visual communication that required physical proximity and sequential information transfer. Yet somehow, they had not only achieved interstellar civilization, but had begun to distinguish themselves in galactic politics. Their diplomatic successes were attributed to an unusual ability to understand and relate to species radically different from themselves. They had prevented 2 major wars through negotiations that other species had declared impossible, and their trade agreements consistently exceeded projected success rates. The xenoarchaeology reports suggested that human success stemmed from their evolutionary history as persistence hunters and social cooperators. Unlike species that had evolved from apex predators or hive-mind organisms, humans had survived through endurance, adaptability, and the formation of complex social bonds with unrelated individuals. They were apparently the only known species that regularly formed lasting emotional attachments to beings from entirely different evolutionary trees. Most intriguing of all was their attitude toward physical and mental differences. Unlike the ethereal dominion's pursuit of genetic perfection, human societies seemed to actively value diversity. Their greatest leaders were often individuals who would have been considered defective by galactic standards, beings with unusual neural patterns, physical limitations, or social behaviors that deviated from accepted norms. Zara HFY allowed herself a moment of hope before crushing it ruthlessly. 300 years of disappointment had taught her not to trust promising theoretical frameworks when reality inevitably proved more complicated. Footsteps approached along the main pathway, the distinctive sound of bipedal locomotion rather than the gliding gait of her own people. She turned toward the sound, expecting to see the tall, imposing figure that her imagination had constructed from the limited visual records. Instead, she found herself looking at a human who stood barely taller than her own diminutive height. Ambassador Marcus Chun was older than she had expected, with gray threading through dark hair and lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting against foreign suns. His clothing was simple by galactic standards, dark fabric with minimal ornamentation, practical rather than beautiful. But his eyes caught her attention immediately. They were brown, warm, and completely focused on her face rather than cataloging her physical defects or searching for escape routes. When he smiled, the expression seemed to engage his entire face in a way that ethereal expressions never did. "Your Royal Highness," he said, offering a bow that was precisely 30 degrees, exactly as diplomatic protocol required. "I'm honored to meet you." His voice was different from the musical tones of her people, rougher, with subtle variations in pitch that seemed to carry meaning beyond the words themselves. She found herself listening not just to what he said, but how he said it, picking up emotional undertones that no telepathic species would ever need to develop. "Ambassador Chun," she replied, returning the gesture with a formal nod. "Welcome to Etherealis Prime. I trust your journey was comfortable. As comfortable as 2 weeks in a metal box hurtling through the void can be," he said, and she was surprised to hear what sounded like gentle humor rather than complaint. "Though I have to admit, the view of your station during approach was worth every uncomfortable moment. It's unlike anything in human space." They began walking along one of the garden's central paths, maintaining the prescribed 2-meter distance that protocol demanded. Zarathustra found herself studying his movement patterns. He walked with purpose, but without the rigid precision that marked her people's interactions. There was something almost organic about his gait, as if he was responding to the environment rather than following a predetermined sequence. "I've been studying your species in preparation for this meeting," she said, deciding to be direct rather than dancing around the obvious questions. "Your diplomatic successes are quite remarkable for a non-telepathic race. How do you manage complex negotiations without the ability to directly share thoughts and emotions?" Marcus paused beside a cluster of singing flowers, their crystalline petals chiming in response to his presence. "We listen," he said simply, "not just to words, but to everything. Tone of voice, body language. What people don't say as much as what they do. We've learned to pay attention to details that telepathic species might not need to develop sensitivity to. That seems inefficient. Surely direct mind-to-mind contact would be faster and more accurate." "Maybe," he agreed, "but it would also eliminate something we consider essential, the choice to reveal or conceal our inner thoughts. Human communication requires trust and vulnerability. When I tell you something important about myself, I'm choosing to share it rather than having it extracted from my mind." The concept was so foreign that Zarathustra stopped walking altogether. "You consider mental privacy a positive trait?" "Essential," Marcus said firmly. "The ability to keep our thoughts private means that when we choose to share them, the act has meaning. When I trust you with my fears or hopes or dreams, it's because I want to, not because you can access them whether I agree or not." She stared at him, processing implications that had never occurred to her. In ethereal society, telepathic communion was considered the highest form of intimacy, the ultimate expression of trust and love. But what if the reverse was true? What if intimacy required the conscious choice to become vulnerable rather than the automatic sharing of all thoughts and feelings? "But how do you know if someone is telling the truth?" she asked. "How can you trust what they say if you can't verify it through direct mental contact?" "We learn to read people," Marcus said, resuming their walk. "Watch their expressions, listen to their voice, observe their behavior over time. It's not foolproof, but it teaches us to pay attention to each other in ways that might not be necessary for telepathic species." They passed a small amphitheater where automated instruments played complex harmonies that responded to the emotional states of nearby listeners. Zarathustra noticed that the music became more upbeat in Marcus's presence, though she wasn't sure if that was significant. "May I ask you a personal question, Ambassador?" "Of course. Why aren't you afraid of me?" Marcus stopped and turned to face her directly, his brown eyes meeting her silver ones without flinching. "Should I be? Everyone else is. Not afraid of physical harm, of course. I'm hardly threatening in that sense. But afraid of contamination, of association with genetic failure, of the political implications of being seen with the Emperor's defective daughter." She had expected him to offer polite reassurances or diplomatic deflections. Instead, he was quiet for a long moment, and she found herself studying his face for the subtle cues he had mentioned. His expression was thoughtful rather than uncomfortable, as if he was considering his answer carefully rather than searching for a way to change the subject. "In human culture," he said finally, "we have a saying, 'What doesn't kill you makes you stronger.' The idea is that adversity and challenges, even negative experiences, can lead to growth and wisdom that wouldn't develop under perfect conditions." That sounds like a rationalization for accepting inferior circumstances. Maybe. Or maybe it's recognition that perfection isn't actually perfect if it can adapt to change or overcome obstacles. He gestured toward the garden around them. "These plants are beautiful because they've been carefully cultivated in controlled conditions. But if this station lost power or suffered an environmental disaster, they would all die because they've never learned to survive hardship. And You think my genetic condition is comparable to environmental hardship? I think you've had to develop abilities and perspectives that others haven't needed to cultivate. That makes you interesting rather than defective. The simple statement hit her like a physical blow. Interesting, not damaged, not unfortunate, not a tragic example of genetic failure. Interesting. What abilities? She asked, surprised by how much his answer mattered to her. You tell me. What have you learned from being isolated from the telepathic network that others haven't had to figure out? HFY considered the question seriously. Independence, I suppose. When you can't rely on the collective consciousness to provide answers or emotional support, you have to develop your own judgment and problem-solving capabilities. I've probably read more individual texts and conducted more independent research than anyone else in the palace. What else? Patience. When you can't communicate at the speed of thought, you learn to accept that understanding takes time. You become more careful about expressing yourself clearly and listening to what others are really saying. And she was warming to the topic now, articulating insights she had never put into words before. Empathy for outsiders. When you're always on the outside looking in, you notice others who don't quite fit the established patterns. I can spot social isolation and emotional distress in ways that fully integrated telepaths often miss. Marcus nodded, as if these were valuable skills rather than consolation prizes for her condition. Those sound like exactly the kinds of abilities that would be useful in diplomatic relations between species who communicate very differently. The implication hung in the air between them. Was he suggesting that her limitations might actually be advantages in certain contexts? The idea was so revolutionary that she felt dizzy just considering it. Ambassador, she said carefully, may I ask why you're really here? My father mentioned diplomatic relations, but this feels like something more specific. Marcus's expression grew more serious. Your father is concerned about the collective's expansion and the threat they represent to individual consciousness. He believes an alliance between our species might be mutually beneficial in addressing the threat. And he thinks marrying his damaged daughter to a human representative would cement such an alliance. He thinks that a successful partnership between individuals from our species might demonstrate that deeper cooperation is possible. Marcus paused, and she caught something in his tone that her newly sensitized listening skills identified as nervousness. To be completely honest, the idea terrifies me. Why? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Because I'm not a diplomatic abstraction or a political symbol. I'm just a person who spent most of his life trying to understand others and help them find common ground. The thought of entering into a marriage for political reasons with someone I've just met goes against everything I believe about human relationships. His honesty was shocking. No one had ever admitted to being frightened by the prospect of marrying her. Usually they were simply repulsed or contemptuous. The fact that he was afraid for human reasons rather than ethereal ones changed the entire dynamic of their conversation. But you're still here, she observed. I'm here because sometimes the right thing to do is also terrifying. And because my preliminary research suggested that you might be the one person in the ethereal dominion who could understand what it feels like to be different from everyone around you. They had reached a secluded grove where silver-leaf trees created a canopy of filtered starlight. The harmonious background music was softer here, more contemplative than the triumphant themes that played in the main thoroughfares. What would such a marriage look like? HFY asked. Even assuming it were possible, our species have completely different social structures, lifespans, communication methods. How could two such different beings ever form a meaningful partnership? I don't know, Marcus admitted, but I think we might have something that most galactic civilizations have lost, the willingness to figure it out as we go. Humans are good at improvisation and adaptation. You've already shown that you can thrive outside conventional social structures. Thrive is a generous interpretation of barely surviving. Is it? You're brilliant, accomplished, and apparently the only member of your species who's developed genuine empathy for outsiders. That sounds like thriving despite obstacles rather than barely surviving. She looked at him carefully, searching for signs of diplomatic manipulation or calculated flattery. Instead, she saw only genuine interest and what she was beginning to recognize as attraction, not to her status or political value, but to her as an individual. Ambassador, she said slowly, If we were to proceed with exploring this possibility, what would you want from such a partnership? Understanding, he said without hesitation. Companionship. Someone to share the view with when I'm looking at something beautiful or trying to solve an impossible problem. The same things any human wants from a marriage, just with the added challenge of figuring out how to build that across species lines. And you think that's possible? Marcus smiled again, and she noticed that the expression seemed to involve his entire being rather than just his facial muscles. Ask me in a year. Right now, I just know that I'd like to find out. For the first time in 300 years, Princess HFY found herself looking forward to tomorrow with genuine anticipation rather than resigned acceptance. The human standing 2 meters away from her was unlike anyone she had ever met. Not because he was perfect, but because he was perfectly willing to be imperfect and find beauty in that imperfection. Ambassador Chun, she said formally, I believe I would like to find out as well. The musical flowers around them chimed in harmonies that sounded almost like celebration. And for once, HFY didn't feel like she was hearing them from the outside looking in. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened in the neutral space of Concordia Station, a massive structure positioned at the gravitational balance point between 3 major star systems. Representatives from 47 civilizations materialized through their preferred transportation methods, some arriving as energy patterns, others through quantum teleportation, and a few, like the human delegation, in actual spacecraft. The circular assembly hall buzzed with telepathic chatter that excluded the few non-psychic species present. Ambassador Marcus Chun sat in the human section, studying the datapad containing intelligence reports that had arrived just hours before. The news of his engagement to Princess HFY had spread through galactic political circles like wildfire, and the reactions were predictably intense. 3 weeks had passed since their first meeting in the palace gardens. 3 weeks of daily conversations, cultural exchanges, and gradually deepening understanding between two beings who had never expected to find connection with anyone, let alone someone from an entirely different species. What had begun as diplomatic necessity had evolved into something that surprised them both with its genuine warmth and mutual respect. The ethereal delegation occupied the most prestigious section of the assembly, their bioluminescent patterns creating a light show that pulsed in synchronized rhythms. Emperor Thrallneth sat at their center, his ancient presence commanding respect even from civilizations that had little love for the Dominion. Princess HFY was notably absent from the delegation, though Marcus knew she was following the proceedings from the Crystal Palace. The chair, recognized as the representative of the Hegemony Confederation, announced the automated system that managed council proceedings. Admiral Kex Thresh rose from the militant section, his 4 arms gesturing in patterns that conveyed barely contained aggression. The Hegemony had built their civilization on conquest and genetic supremacy, viewing any deviation from their ideals as weakness to be exploited. Honored delegates, his translation device rendered his harsh vocalizations into standard galactic. We gather today to address a threat to the natural order that governs galactic civilization. The proposed union between the ethereal royal house and the primitive Terran species represents a dangerous precedent that undermines the genetic hierarchies that have maintained stability for millennia. Marcus kept his expression neutral despite the insult. Human diplomatic training emphasized patience and the long view, especially when dealing with species whose aggressive tendencies made them prone to tactical errors. The Hegemony has maintained detailed genetic records of all major species for over 2,000 years, Kex Thresh continued. Humans consistently rank in the bottom tier for telepathic ability, physical capabilities, and technological advancement. Their addition to ethereal bloodlines can only result in degradation of superior genetic stock. A ripple of agreement passed through several delegations, though Marcus noted that the most advanced civilizations remained silent. The cosmic architects, ancient beings of pure energy who had transcended physical form eons ago, observed without comment. The Silicon Collective, machine intelligences who valued logic above all else, analyzed the proceedings with algorithmic detachment. Furthermore, the Admiral's voice rose with righteous indignation. This alliance grants humans access to ethereal technologies and political influence far beyond their primitive capabilities. We have already seen evidence of human infiltration into advanced galactic networks, their persistent refusal to submit to proper psychic evaluation, and their suspicious resistance to collective conversion protocols. That last point drew immediate attention from multiple delegations. The collective's expansion had been a source of growing concern throughout the galaxy, and humanity's apparent immunity to their conversion technologies was both mysterious and politically significant. The chair recognized the Vorthan Empire next. Duchess Ralvinth materialized at the speaking platform, her crystalline form refracting the chamber's lighting into prismatic patterns. The Vorthan Empire has maintained cordial relations with both the Ethereal Dominion and the Terran Federation. Her harmonic voice filled the chamber. We see no reason why a voluntary alliance between their royal houses should concern this council. Marriage diplomacy has been practiced by galactic civilizations since the formation of the first interstellar governments. This is not marriage diplomacy, Kex Thresh interrupted, a breach of protocol that drew sharp harmonics of disapproval from the chair. This is genetic contamination disguised as political alliance. The human species has contributed nothing of value to galactic civilization. They are planetary parasites who consume resources while producing no significant technological or cultural advancement. Marcus felt the familiar anger that came with species-based insults, but also noted the tactical opening the Admiral had created. The hegemony's aggressive stance was alienating moderate delegates who might have been swayed by more diplomatic arguments. The chair finally recognized the Terran Federation delegation. Marcus rose and walked to the speaking platform, acutely aware that every sensor in the chamber was analyzing his biometric data for signs of deception or emotional instability. Honored delegates, he began, his voice carrying clearly without technological amplification. I stand before you not as a representative of genetic theory or political abstraction, but as an individual who has spent the past 3 weeks learning to communicate across the greatest divide possible, that between two entirely different forms of consciousness. He paused, allowing the translation systems to process his words while he studied the assembled delegations. The key was to make this about principles rather than species politics. The Admiral speaks of genetic hierarchies and natural order, but I would ask this assembly to consider what those hierarchies have actually produced. For 2,000 years, galactic civilization has been stratified according to telepathic ability, technological advancement, and conformity to established patterns. And yet in all that time, we have seen constant warfare, territorial disputes, and now the rise of the collective, a force that threatens the very consciousness the hegemony claims to protect. Several delegates shifted in their positions, their attention focusing more intently on his words. Humans have something that seems to be rare in this galaxy: the ability to form meaningful relationships across species lines. Not because we're superior, but because we're used to being different from everyone around us. We've had to learn to understand others rather than simply dominating or converting them. And what has this supposed understanding accomplished? Kex Thresh demanded from his section. In the past century alone, human diplomats have prevented the Rigel War between the Vorthan Empire and the Crystalline Syndicate. We negotiated the trade agreements that ended the resource conflicts in the Outer Rim. We've established peaceful first contact protocols with 17 previously unknown species, none of which required military intervention or force compliance. Marcus turned to address the Emperor directly. Your Majesty, 3 weeks ago you introduced me to a brilliant, accomplished individual who happened to be isolated from her people's telepathic networks. Rather than seeing this as a defect to be corrected or hidden, my species sees it as a different way of experiencing consciousness, one that might offer unique insights into the challenges facing all of us. The Emperor's bioluminescent patterns shifted to colors that Marcus had learned indicated deep thought rather than immediate response. The real question before this council, Marcus continued, is whether we value genetic purity over functional cooperation, theoretical hierarchies over practical problem-solving, and species supremacy over the kind of understanding that might actually help us deal with existential threats like the collective. Genetic mixing leads to chaos and degradation, Admiral Kex Thresh declared. Look at your own planet's history. Constant warfare, resource depletion, social instability. This is what happens when natural hierarchies are ignored. Actually, Marcus replied with a slight smile. Our history shows exactly the opposite. Humans are strongest when we combine different genetic lines, different cultures, different ways of thinking. Our greatest achievements come from diversity rather than purity. He activated a holographic display showing human genetic diversity data. Every major human advancement, from agriculture to space flight to the diplomatic protocols that have prevented wars in this very chamber, came from a meeting of different human populations with different ideas and capabilities. The data showed complex interaction patterns that most galactic species would have found chaotic, but which demonstrated remarkable adaptive flexibility. And Princess HFY. The question came from an unexpected source, one of the Silicon Collective representatives. What is her perspective on this genetic mixing? Marcus hesitated. HFY had asked to address the council herself, but revealing her presence might compromise her safety if the political situation deteriorated. The decision was taken out of his hands as a new figure materialized on the transport platform. Princess HFY appeared in full royal regalia, her asymmetrical form somehow making the elaborate ceremonial robes look elegant rather than awkward. Her damaged, bioluminescent patterns flickered irregularly, but her posture carried absolute authority. The chamber fell silent. Many delegates had never seen the ethereal princess in person, and her visible differences from her species' norm created an immediate tension. Honored delegates, she spoke clearly despite her physical limitations, I claim the right to address this assembly as the individual whose future you are debating. The Emperor's patterns flashed surprise and concern, but he made no move to stop her. For 300 years, I have been proof that genetic perfection and telepathic communion are not the only paths to consciousness and understanding. I have learned to think independently, to solve problems without collective input, and to find value in perspectives that differ from accepted norms. She moved carefully to the center of the speaking platform, her limp pronounced, but her dignity intact. Ambassador Chun represents something I had never encountered before. The idea that difference can be strength rather than weakness, that isolation can lead to insight rather than just loneliness, and that meaningful connection doesn't require identical capabilities or experiences. Your Highness, Admiral Kex Thresh spoke with barely concealed contempt. Surely you cannot seriously consider contaminating ethereal genetics with primitive human stock. HFY turned to face him directly, her silver eyes reflecting the chamber's lighting. Admiral, I've spent 3 centuries being told that my genetics are contaminated, that my neural patterns are defective, that my very existence represents a failure of ethereal perfection. If genetic purity is so important to galactic stability, perhaps someone should explain why the pure ethereal bloodlines have produced only one individual capable of meaningful communication with non-telepathic species. The challenge hung in the air like an electrical charge. She had just suggested that her defects were actually advantages in certain contexts, a concept that challenged fundamental assumptions about genetic hierarchy. Moreover, she continued, the Admiral speaks of human primitiveness, but fails to address their remarkable resistance to collective conversion. While superior species fall to collective logic with disturbing frequency, humans seem naturally immune to their consciousness-altering technologies. Perhaps genetic purity is actually a vulnerability rather than a strength. That observation sent ripples of concern through multiple delegations. The collective's expansion had been accelerating, and their conversion technologies were becoming more sophisticated with each encounter. Marcus felt a surge of pride and affection as he watched HFY command the attention of beings who had spent centuries dismissing her as irrelevant. She was magnificent in her refusal to accept others' limitations on her worth. The choice before this council is simple, she concluded. You can continue to stratify galactic civilization according to outdated genetic theories, and watch as the collective converts pure species one by one. Or you can recognize that diversity, adaptation, and the willingness to form connections across difference might be exactly what we need to preserve consciousness and free will in this galaxy. She turned to Marcus and, for the first time since entering the chamber, smiled. As for my personal choice, I choose the being who sees potential where others see problems, who values understanding over domination, and who believes that two different minds working together might accomplish things that neither could achieve alone. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of telepathic chatter, vocal arguments, and harmonic disputes. The Emperor's patterns flashed through rapid sequences that Marcus recognized as profound pride mixed with political calculation. When order was finally restored, the vote was closer than expected but decisive. 31 delegations supported the right of individuals to form alliances across species lines. 16 opposed on genetic purity grounds. As delegates began dispersing through their various transportation methods, Marcus found himself standing beside HFY on the observation deck of the human transport ship. Through the transparent aluminum, they could see the lights of dozens of vessels departing Concordia Station, carrying news of their engagement to every corner of galactic civilization. "Any regrets?" he asked, taking her hand in his, a gesture that would have scandalized most ethereal society, but felt perfectly natural to both of them. "Only that it took 300 years to find someone who thought my differences were interesting rather than tragic," she replied, her bioluminescent patterns flickering in what he had learned was contentment. "Well," Marcus said, "watching the stars will pass outside. Humans have always been slow learners. Good thing you're patient." Princess HFY laughed, a sound that was becoming as familiar and welcome to him as his own heartbeat. Tomorrow they would return to the Crystal Palace to begin planning a wedding that would unite not just two individuals, but two radically different approaches to consciousness and connection. It would be complicated, challenging, and probably controversial for decades to come. It would be perfectly human. The wedding ceremony took place in the neutral space between galaxies, aboard a specially constructed station that combined ethereal crystal technology with human engineering principles. The structure itself was a work of art and diplomacy, its flowing crystalline sections connected by practical human corridors and meeting halls. Representatives from 73 civilizations had come to witness what many considered either the most romantic event in galactic history or the most dangerous political precedent ever set. Princess HFY stood in her private chambers, studying her reflection in a mirror that had been specially programmed to compensate for her asymmetrical bioluminescent patterns. The wedding dress was a marvel of diplomatic cooperation, ethereal crystal silk that responded to emotional states, cut in human fashion to accommodate her unique physical form. The irregular flicker of her natural lighting had been enhanced rather than corrected, creating patterns that were beautiful precisely because they were unpredictable. "You look magnificent," said Dr. Sarah Kim, the human physician who had become HFY's closest friend over the past 6 months of preparation. "Marcus is going to forget how to speak when he sees you." The friendship itself was remarkable. Dr. Kim was a xenobiologist who had been part of the human delegation, initially brought to study potential biological complications of human ethereal bonding. Instead, she had become fascinated by HFY's unique neural patterns and had proposed several research projects that framed the princess's differences as evolutionary advantages rather than genetic defects. "I'm terrified," HFY admitted, allowing her bioluminescent patterns to shift to the deep blue that indicated profound nervousness. "Not of marrying Marcus. That's the one thing I'm certain about. But of everything that comes after. The political implications, the expectations, the possibility that we might fail and prove all the skeptics right." "Hey," Dr. Kim moved to stand beside her at the mirror. "You want to know what I've learned about humans in the past 6 months? We specialize in making things work that have no right to function. Marcus told me yesterday that you two have developed your own communication system that works better than anything he's experienced with telepathic species." It was true. Over the months of courtship and preparation, HFY and Marcus had created a hybrid form of communication that combined human body language with ethereal harmonic responses, verbal conversation with careful observation of bioluminescent patterns. They could have entire conversations through glances and subtle gestures that would be invisible to outside observers, but carried complex emotional and intellectual content. "The nervousness is normal," Dr. Kim continued. "Marcus spent 3 hours this morning pacing around the human quarters, muttering about diplomatic protocols and whether he was wearing the right ceremonial decorations. I finally had to sedate him with chamomile tea and force him to meditate. The image of the composed, diplomatic Marcus Chun, reduced to nervous pacing, made Zara-THYSS smile, despite her anxiety. One of the wonderful things about their relationship was discovering that he was just as uncertain and vulnerable as she was, but willing to be brave despite the uncertainty. A soft chime indicated that it was time for the ceremony to begin. Zara-THYSS took one last look at herself in the mirror. The broken princess who had spent 3 centuries believing she would never be enough for anyone. Now she was about to marry a man who thought she was perfect exactly as she was, and the union would be witnessed by representatives from across the galaxy. The ceremony itself was a carefully choreographed blend of human and ethereal traditions, designed to honor both cultures while creating something entirely new. The main hall was filled with beings of every description. Crystalline entities whose thoughts moved at the speed of light, energy patterns that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, and solid matter species like humans who experience time and space in linear fashion. Marcus waited at the ceremonial platform, wearing formal human diplomatic attire, enhanced with ethereal crystal accessories that caught and refracted the hall's lighting. When Zara-THYSS entered, walking slowly due to her physical limitations, but radiating dignity and determination, his face transformed with an expression of joy and wonder that needed no translation. Emperor Thrallneth presided over the ceremony, his ancient voice carrying clearly through the vast space as he spoke the ritual words that would bind his daughter to a human in the eyes of galactic law. The traditional ethereal marriage ceremony involved telepathic communion between the partners, but they had adapted it to include human elements of verbal vows and conscious choice. Princess Zara-THYSS of the ethereal dominion, the Emperor intoned, "Do you choose this bond of your own free will, understanding that it binds not just individuals, but the future of both species?" "I choose this bond," Zara-THYSS replied, her voice carrying clearly despite her nervousness. "I choose Marcus Chun of Earth, not because he completes me, but because he enhances me, not because he fixes what is broken, but because he sees beauty in what others call flawed." The human portion of the ceremony was presided over by Admiral Patricia Hayes, the highest-ranking Terran Federation official present. Her words were simpler, but no less meaningful. "Ambassador Marcus Chun, do you take Princess Zara-THYSS as your partner in all things, to support her individual growth while building something together that neither could achieve alone?" "I do," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "I choose Zara-THYSS, not because she needs saving, but because she sees possibilities I never imagined, not because she's like me, but because she's wonderfully, brilliantly herself." The exchange of vows was followed by the presentation of gifts that symbolized the joining of their two worlds. Marcus offered Zara-THYSS a small device that contained the complete library of human literature, music, and art, every story, song, and image that his species had created in their brief but creative history. It was a gift of culture and imagination, the accumulated dreams and aspirations of an entire civilization. Zara-THYSS presented Marcus with something even more precious, a crystal matrix that contained her own memories and thoughts, but encoded in a way that could be accessed gradually without telepathic abilities. It was the most intimate gift an ethereal could offer, the sharing of direct experience across the barrier of different consciousness types. The ceremony concluded with a moment that surprised everyone present. Instead of the traditional telepathic communion or human kiss, Zara-THYSS and Marcus simply stood together, holding hands while looking into each other's eyes. For 30 seconds, the vast hall was completely silent as two beings from different species and different worlds simply appreciated each other's presence. When they turned to face the assembled delegates, the applause was thunderous. Beings who communicated through light, sound, vibration, and thought all found ways to express approval and celebration. Even representatives from species that had opposed the marriage seemed caught up in the genuine emotion of the moment. The reception that followed was a marvel of diplomatic logistics. Foods and atmospheres suitable for dozens of different biological systems had been prepared. Translation protocols allowed beings with completely different sensory modalities to communicate. Entertainment included everything from human jazz music to crystalline harmonic poetry to ethereal light sculptures that responded to collective emotional states. Marcus found himself in the remarkable position of being congratulated by beings he had only read about in xenobiology textbooks. The Silicon Collective Representative, a distributed intelligence that existed across multiple quantum processors, expressed what Marcus interpreted as approval for the logical elegance of their solution to interspecies communication barriers. Your pairing demonstrates functional adaptation to environmental challenges, the collective entity stated through harmonic tones that bypass the translation system. This suggests potential for similar adaptations in other contexts. Even more surprising was the approach of Admiral Kex Thresh, the hegemony representative who had opposed the marriage in the Galactic Council. The four-armed warrior moved with obvious reluctance, but determination. Ambassador Shunned, he said through his translation device, I still believe genetic mixing is dangerous to galactic stability. However, I acknowledge that your resistance to collective conversion technologies may prove strategically valuable. The hegemony offers formal alliance in defensive operations against collective expansion. The political implications hit Marcus like a thunderbolt. The hegemony's military might combined with human unpredictability and ethereal technological advancement could create a defensive alliance capable of stopping the collective's expansion. His marriage to Zara THYSS hadn't just united two individuals. It had potentially shifted the balance of power across the galaxy. Later, as the reception wound down and various delegations departed through their preferred methods of travel, Marcus and Zara THYSS found themselves alone on the observation deck of their new home, a specially designed ship that would allow them to travel together while accommodating both of their species' biological requirements. Any regrets? Marcus asked, echoing the question from their first private moment months earlier. Only that we didn't meet sooner, Zara THYSS replied, her bioluminescent patterns settling into the warm golden glow that he had learned meant perfect contentment. Though I suppose we both needed time to become who we are before we could appreciate what we found in each other. Through the transparent aluminum, they could see the lights of departing ships carrying news of their marriage to every corner of known space. Some would report it as a romantic triumph, others as a dangerous precedent, still others as a necessary strategic alliance in uncertain times. What happens now? Zara THYSS asked. We've proven that two different species can find love and understanding across impossible barriers. Where do we go from here? Marcus considered the question seriously. In the months since their engagement, they had received hundreds of requests from other interspecies couples seeking advice and support. Diplomatic missions wanted their expertise in cross-cultural communication. Research institutions proposed studies of their hybrid communication methods. Even the Galactic Council had suggested that they might serve as mediators in future disputes between radically different civilizations. I think, he said slowly, we figure out how to be ourselves on a larger scale. How to show the galaxy that difference can be strength, that understanding doesn't require similarity, and that some barriers exist only because no one has been brave enough to cross them. Zara THYSS smiled, the expression lighting up her unique features with genuine happiness. So we become professional bridge builders? We become whatever the galaxy needs us to be. But we do it together, as ourselves, without apologizing for who we are or trying to become what others think we should be. As if summoned by their conversation, a priority message appeared on the ship's communication system. The sender was unexpected. The cosmic architects, the ancient beings of pure energy who rarely involve themselves in galactic politics. The message was brief but profound. Princess Zara THYSS and Ambassador Shunned, the architects observe with interest your successful integration of disparate consciousness patterns. Request consultation regarding collective expansion countermeasures. Your unique perspective may provide solutions that traditional approaches have failed to achieve. Marcus and Zara THYSS looked at each other, seeing the same mixture of excitement and apprehension reflected in each other's expressions. The most advanced civilization in known space was asking for their help in addressing the galaxy's greatest existential threat. Ready for our first official assignment as a married couple? Marcus asked. Let's go save the galaxy, Zara THYSS replied, her patterns shifting to the brilliant silver that meant determination and hope. Their ship turned toward the coordinates provided by the cosmic architects, carrying two beings who had started as the most unlikely couple in galactic history and had become something unprecedented, proof that consciousness, love, and understanding could flourish across any barrier if two people were brave enough to try. Behind them, the lights of the wedding station faded into starlight, but ahead lay infinite possibilities for two souls who had learned that being different wasn't a flaw to be corrected, but a strength to be celebrated. In a galaxy increasingly divided between conformity and chaos, they represented a third option, the courage to be authentically themselves while building something beautiful together. The stars had witnessed many wonders in their billions of years of existence, but the marriage of Princess Zartichwesses and Ambassador Marcus Chun would be remembered as the moment when the galaxy learned that love truly could conquer all, even the vast spaces between worlds.